Welcome to All Things Moore County, Moore County's weekly radio show, highlighting the many facets of the Sandhills. That includes real estate, lifestyles, community, and neighborhood. And now, from 4 Properties, here's your host, Bill Sahadi.
Our house in the middle of our street.
Good morning and welcome to the talk show, All Things Moore County. Dorothy, are you going to welcome me back?
Yes, you've been gone for so long. I was missing you.
Couple of weeks, huh?
Yes.
How did the blues crawl go? I heard it was pretty busy.
That's what I heard. It's getting bigger every year, so.
It really is. That was the weekend of, I think, July the 9th.
Yes.
And I was up in New York and missed it.
Yeah, you went to New York without me.
I went to visit my sisters so they could correct me
I'm sure.
about how to live my life better.
That's right.
And last week we did a replay of the show with Barrett Walker on generational poverty. It was initially aired in April, and I thought that the content of the show was so important. There's so many different types of people with different understandings of other people's realities these days.
Yeah.
You can start with politics, and you can just take it from there.
Yeah.
But I thought it was very appropriate, and they just had their the coalition's golf fundraiser this past Monday, which I understand was very successful.
Was it? That's good.
Yeah. 2016 has been an amazing year in a lot of respects, and we're privileged today to be speaking with an attorney friend of mine, Robert Thompson, who has been practicing real estate law in North Carolina for 33 years. 2016 has been such a busy year with real estate, and we have such an influx of younger buyers moving into Moore County. Anyone that's been doing anything in Moore County for 30 years can look back and see all the changes that have gone on. And there have been many changes in the legal profession, many changes in the lending business. So all of us sort of work together, and Bob is going to be our guest for the full hour. Let me tell you a little bit about Bob. I've worked with him for about 10 years. He's handled lots of closings for clients of mine, and if I had to describe Bob as an attorney, I would say careful, cautious, careful. I keep coming back to the word careful, and that's kind of what you want in an attorney, crossing every T and dotting every I. Bob is certified by the North Carolina State Bar Board of Legal Specialization in commercial and residential real estate. He also specializes in estate planning and probate law. With many vast changes in the law in respect to real property in the last 10 years, I'm hoping that my conversation with Bob will attempt to, explain some of the changes and the requirements. Bob is currently the chairman of the Board of Zoning Adjustment in the town of Southern Pines. Also, currently the North Carolina Bar Association Continuing Legal Education Committee. He's a member. He's been a member of the North Carolina Bar Association Real Property Section Council, and Bob will tell us what that is in a minute, and the North Carolina Bar Association Real Property Tax Force. Bob, that's the beginning of a resume. We got a chance to speak about a week or so ago about getting together, and you had indicated to me that in your career here, you've probably done over 5,000 or so transactions.
I think so, Bill. It's hard. I didn't count them.
You didn't count them?
It went along, but...
So many people who come into town, they don't understand the closing process. A lot of people get confused, and one of the first questions they'll ask us as a broker, oh, you use attorneys in North Carolina as opposed to title companies, because not every state uses attorneys.
Yes, Bill. There are basically two different philosophies. We are an attorney state. A lot of the East Coast is attorney states. The attorneys do a lot of the work in the closing.
Right.
As you move west, title companies take over and do a lot of the work, and when you get all the way to the West Coast, I think almost everything is done by title companies.
Is that right?
But we're an attorney state, and I think, in my opinion, we probably do some of the best work. We work for clients. We don't work for the title company. We don't work for the banks. We work for our clients.
Right.
So we're most interested in how the transaction goes because they're our clients.
Right. How'd you like my description of you as saying careful?
I like being careful.
Right. Meticulous. So many things. I've noticed a lot of clients of mine, they take the closing process for granted because what we tell them is we can help them find a house. We can help them put a contract together. We pass the contract off to you, but in North Carolina, only the attorney can get the buyer and the seller to the finish line. We can't do that as real estate brokers.
Well, we try hard to do that.
We try hard.
But we do, a lot of work is the intermediary between the buyer, the seller, the broker, the realtor, and all of the various services that come together. We hold the closing in North Carolina. We distribute the funds. We do the settlement statement. We do the title certification. We do the title search. And we get the title policy that goes to the lender and to the buyer. We also prepare the documents on the seller side for the seller.
Right.
And then we swap all those things between the buyer's attorney and the seller's attorney. So we're kind of the middleman in that. The lender sends us their instructions. We have the contract, which is a set of instructions on its own. And we also have the things that we have to do ethically and legally to get the closing together.
Mm-hmm. What would you tell a first-time buyer? What is the most important role of an attorney in their real estate transaction?
Well, I think there may not be one most important, but the title certification is very important. The buyer needs to know if there are any changes in the title or anything which would cause a problem for the buyer in the future or prevent him from reselling the property.
Right.
The closing process, we run all the funds to our trust account. We have to do that to the penny. We have to have a certain amount of funds come in, and then we have to have exactly the same amount of funds go out. So that's important to the buyer. We don't want any loose pennies floating around. So you have that aspect of it, preparation of the documents. The documents are very important because that's what conveys title to the buyer.
Right.
So there are a lot of important aspects to what we do in various places. We also have to file those documents with the register of deeds, make sure they're properly filed.
Right.
And we have to update the title and make sure that the seller hasn't slipped in and gotten a mortgage in between or have a tax lien or something of that sort.
You bring up a great point. Many times in a closing for a buyer, you get the payoff, the seller's payoff on their mortgage, which has to be settled at closing. But sometimes we find out at the last minute there's a home equity line, but it has a zero balance. In other words, there's nothing borrowed against it, but it's an open line of credit. That can cause a problem for the buyer, can't it?
Well, zero can balance. Equity lines are especially dangerous they have resulted in not only zero balance, but ones that resurrect themselves after closing.
Right.
Have caused the largest amount of losses for the North Carolina title companies. So they are extremely concerned about those equity lines. When it's a zero balance, we don't have anything to pay. We're sitting there with no check to give to the lender. They don't pay attention very well unless they have money coming to them.
Yep.
The equity line is really an open line of credit, so even if you pay it off, if you don't get it properly canceled, then the seller can go back in and write another check or borrow some more.
Right.
At that point, once the seller has sold the property, then that equity line is a lien on the new buyer's property.
Right.
So the new buyer can be stuck with a lien and, in effect, the title company, and they're not very happy about that.
Mm-hmm.
But they're very dangerous at this point. They're sort of open-ended, and we take great care to make sure that we get them canceled.
Right.
The other issue with state law is that the state law says that the seller has to cancel the equity line, which is a little different. Normally, when we go to pay off a mortgage, we are giving them a check. The bank takes the check. When the balance goes down to zero, the mortgage is paid. The computer generates a satisfaction, and all is good, assuming we gave them the right amount. But that doesn't necessarily happen with an equity line.
When you do a title search for a buyer, we write a contract. We deliver a copy of the contract to you as the attorney and a copy to the lender. You immediately start doing a title search on the property in preparation for the closing. How far back do you go to research that particular property?
Well, we try and go at least 50 or 60 years back. We find a starting point, meaning a deed that we feel is good and has good title and that shows that someone in the past owned the property. We then pull that title forward, call it the chain of title.
Right.
And we make sure that each of the deeds on the chain is appropriate, find out what encumbrances and any other sort of imperfection are out there. And when we get to the present day, then we should know everything about that property. We should make sure that it is clear except for what the current owner has put against it.
Can you give me an example of a title search that you've done that might have come up with a blemish maybe 20 or 30 years ago that might not have gotten 100% cleared up, or something that was discovered that was not rectified?
I have lots of examples. Most of the ones that come to me right now are more modern examples because we're dealing with them. But
right.
We have had lots of survey issues, missing cancellations, deeds of trust that aren't canceled.
Right.
We have had people that granted some interest in the property, reserved a life estate, did something that was not canceled or used, terminated.
Right.
And those are encumbrances on the property that we cannot go into a closing with. We have to clean the title before, or make sure the title is clean before we feel that we can allow the buyer to take title to it.
Okay. Lots of buyers ask me about title insurance. They look at their closing costs, and they don't quite understand what title insurance is, because we tell them it's a one-time fee, and it insures them against any. Well, you take it from there. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Well, I have to go back to my historical roots.
Okay.
When I first started practicing, we used title opinions. The attorney's title opinion was what we used to assure the buyer that they were getting good title and tell them about the title. At that point, we were the insuring party. that the buyer was looking to make sure that their title was good, and if we didn't do it right, then we were responsible. After that, the mortgages began to be sold on the open market and packaged, and they had to have some way to make certain that all of the titles were equally good. You didn't want to have an outlier out there in a package, or have titles that had come from thousands of different attorneys that had different quality levels, and so they started using title insurance. The title insurance protects the lender, and it protects those buyers of mortgages in their packages. As far as the buyer of the property, it also protects them if they buy a purchaser's policy, an owner's policy. Mm-hmm. But the primary purpose of title insurance, I think, is really to protect the lender. They're all requiring that. Everybody requires it. The owner's coverage is pretty much the same coverage, and we pay very little in North Carolina to get an owner's policy. Basically, it's just duplicative coverage. So, but the buyer also gets the protection. Mm-hmm. What the title insurance protects is the buyer or the lender from any defects in the title that come up after closing. And those defects, the title company will come in and try and rectify them. They will pay for that. They will use lawsuits or corrective measures. They will hire other attorneys to come in and make sure the title is corrected. And that is primarily where the title insurance company comes in. If they can't correct it, then their obligation, I think, is probably eventually to replace the property.
Can you give me an example of what a defect in a title would be? A couple of examples?
Of course.
I'm sure you could.
One of my best examples in a defect in title, and this happened in another county, so I don't have to talk about Moore County.
Okay.
But
we'll change the name of the show from All Things Moore County to All Things Whatever Other County.
It just shows that Moore County's better.
That's right.
We don't have these things here. We just have them in other counties. Okay. But we were doing a title for a group that was buying a large tract of land. And when we went through, we took it back to the 20s and took the title back. And there were a myriad of estates. Most of that property is passed through estates and inheritance or through intestacy. And when we got to the end of the road, what we found is that we had about 25 or 30 heirs who were in the chain of title, only about 15 or 16 of which had actually participated in the sale. So we were missing probably half of the property. And an attorney in that county had certified title, and so we were going back trying to fix it. The problem with that case was the heirs were scattered all over the Northeast at this point. And so what the title company ended up doing, I think, it wasn't a huge policy. They just gave the insured the value of the policy and said, see you later. So they were basically buying out the problem by giving the total insurance amount to the individual that owned the property. Mm-hmm. Eventually, the seller of that property went to court, got the title taken care of, and we eventually did close on it. But it was about a 2-year process.
Yeah. We're going to come back in the second set. We are speaking with real estate attorney Robert Thompson all about real estate closings in North Carolina and Moore County. We'll be right back.
there's a crowd, there's always something happening, and it's usually quite loud.
Welcome back to All Things Moore County and our conversation with real estate attorney Robert Thompson. 33 years is a long time, Bob. And I want to get at some point into how you got here and the perspective that you've developed. But since we ended the first set talking about defects in title, one thing that people don't know about attorneys and real estate brokers sometimes is all the hidden drama that we kind of buffer from the client until problems can get solved. Many times your office has called me and said, we've come up with a glitch, we have a title issue, and we're working on it. And then we kind of get uptight and nervous, but we almost both mutually agree to just sort of like communicate between each other before we have to. You try to give information to the client on a need basis, I guess. But talk a little bit about some of the things that go into a title search, because it is such a big part of what you do.
Well, I'd be glad to do that, and let me mention, but we want to shield the client a little because we're talking in strange terminology.
Right.
They don't understand what we're talking about when we
Right.
talk about title defects or title matters. So we don't want to scare them out of their wits, but we want to explain why there might be a little time while we're working that out. So we want to keep them informed without scaring them too much. So we do that, but when we go through a title search, and that is what we do to make certain that the buyer is going to get good title, marketable title. We're looking at a number of things, and those are things that we want to convey to the purchaser so the purchaser knows what he's getting.
Right.
And if there are any defects, and there almost always are defects in titles. I can find a defect in almost every title in Moore County given a little time. But the question is, are they fatal? And do they interfere with marketability?
Right.
But we're looking to see at the current owner. We want to make sure he owns the property. We want to go back our 60 years or so to check that title. We want to make sure all the taxes are covered. Taxes are lien for 10 years, so you could theoretically be stuck with 10 years worth of taxes. Want to make sure all of those are paid. Want to make sure there are no judgments back there. Judgments also last 10 years and could be a real nuisance if you end up with one because they're enforceable against the new owner of the property. And the reason we're concerned about many of these things is that they follow the property. They don't follow the owner. So the new owner is stuck with what the
Assumes
old owner
it.
did to the property. We're going to want to know the deeds of trust, as we mentioned. We're going to try and get those properly paid off, see if there are any equity lines especially. Restrictive covenants. Many of the developments in Moore County were governed by restrictive covenants originally. So we have some very large developments that are sort of quasi-cities, and they're ruled by restrictive covenants and by boards of homeowners associations. We want the buyer to know that there are restrictive covenants out there. We want to give them a chance to look at them, see what's in them, and if they have any concerns or if it's going to interfere with what they want to do, then we need to work that out. I want to check the plat, make sure the plat's in good shape, and if there's a survey, we want to make sure the survey matches the description of the property. We're looking for easements and access, mechanics and materialmen's liens that can be filed after the closing, and any other sort of encumbrance that might come up to interfere with the buyer's use and enjoyment of the property. And we like to report that to the buyer before closing. We like to do it as soon as we can, because we want them to have our title opinion, we want them to have the restrictive covenants, we want them to see a copy of the plat. We'd like to make sure that the property that we think we're closing on is the one that they think they're buying.
And that sounds like it makes sense, but guess what?
And I have had an occasion or two when that was different. We said that this is the one that we're closing on, and the buyer said, "Oh no, that's not it."
Right.
Luckily, we weren't too far along at that point. There is a case where in Moore County, where in Pinehurst, the numbers are duplicative, and so somebody was bought a property, closed on a property in one numbered unit, and they were actually getting title to the same number, lot number, in a different unit number.
Mm-hmm.
Those things get resolved, but they're
Mm-hmm.
fairly big problems when they come up.
Mm-hmm.
But those are some of the things that we do. We like to make sure the buyer understands what he's getting.
In your opinion, how important is it for a buyer to have a survey done before closing?
Well, I think it depends somewhat on the circumstances. If it's a brand new house, they may want to have a survey, and I think most of the municipalities now are requiring surveys so they make sure the builder is building it within the setbacks.
Mm-hmm.
On farm properties or anything out in the country, you definitely want a survey to see, especially if it's a split out,
Mm-hmm.
to make sure what you're getting and to know what the boundaries of the property are. If the property has been the same for 50 years, or if it's a condominium, which doesn't change, then there's no real reason to get a survey. Lenders get survey coverage on their title insurance without a survey. Owners do not. Owners have to have a survey in order to get survey coverage. So when we're looking at it, if we see a problem,
Yeah.
then we'll say, we think you need a survey, because we see something out there that is amiss, or that we don't understand, or that we have a question, and the best way to do that is to go look at what's on the ground.
I remember a couple of years ago, I sat at a closing table with you and Amity and Fred Aldridge. I don't know if you remember. They were purchasing a second home on South Valley Road in Southern Pines. And there was, and I had to leave the closing table and go out to the property to verify, and I can't remember the entire, there was either a gas line, something, and I can't, it just came to my mind, but things come up even at the very last minute. Do you recall so many transactions, it must be hard.
I don't recall that one, but we have had to go look at manhole covers and
Yeah.
Where gas markers are,
Right.
and see whether there's something out there. Sometimes you can tell where there's a sewer line that might affect the property, and sometimes it's hard just by looking at it. It's really hard to tell.
Yeah, right.
So that would be a reason to get a survey. And there are many things that show up on a survey that are helpful to us. So we like to have surveys, but I'm not going to give you a blanket statement that everyone should have one.
Besides the property lines on a survey, what do you look for?
Well, we're looking for, we want to, compare all of the data that's on that survey with the prior title and make sure that everything lines up appropriately. The surveyor is going to give us what he found, but we want to compare that to what we found on our title search. He could have found sewer lines by locating, as I said, manholes that cross the property. He may have found encroachments. Fence encroachments are always very nice. Normally they're not too extensive, but you can have some where fences are not in the right place at all. We want to look and see where the house is located, make sure it's within the setbacks. And the surveyor is amazingly good about putting good stuff on there for us.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of some of the things that happened in some of our closings. One thing that buyers will always ask about is the closing date on a contract. Unless something is time is of the essence, which makes it, I guess, a drop-dead date. The closing date is not always written in stone, is it?
Well, there's a provision in the contract that allows that to slip.
Right.
And we always try and make closing dates, but to some extent, the lender determines when the closing is going to be by when they're ready to go. We can't go much of anywhere without the money.
The lenders we're going to segue into the third set, but we're going to lead into the lender's role in a closing and the attorney-lender relationship, because it's become, it seems, so integral, so important for a smooth closing, because so many of the delays that we seem to have seems to rest with the poor beleaguered lenders, especially lately. Our world has changed. Your world has changed since in the last 10 or 15 years in closings.
Absolutely, and the lender has more irons in their fire than they ever did before.
Right.
They are having to pull more things together themselves. They are in charge of getting the disclosure statement together, and we reduplicate it because we need to disperse funds based on that. But they're having to deal also with other buyers of these mortgages. So they can have a lender very far away that says, oh, knows nothing about Southern Pines, that says, oh, by the way, we're concerned about this.
Mm-hmm.
And then the lender has to take care of that if they want that loan sold.
Mm-hmm.
So we get a lot of things that we think probably are not too awfully significant that somebody has demanded of the lender, but it holds things up.
I've noticed a big difference since 2007, 2008. Lenders have really set the tone and the tenor for the timing or the execution of a contract, and we wind up having to speak a lot with our clients about their expectations about what to expect because of delays. I've seen you be very patient, but my guess is that there's a Pepto-Bismol or two in your recent past. Lenders sort of, they've been running the show for the last couple of years, I think, and we're all trying to be in rhythm and step with them.
Yeah, I don't think they quite have caught on to what all they're doing.
Right.
It's new to them.
Right.
And a lot of the current requirements have only been in since September, October of last year.
That's right.
And so they're new to it. They're adjusting. They're trying to get their systems in play. We had one the other day, just a short war story, where the lender shorted us some money on the closing, and our system will not let us be short. We can't disperse unless we tie to the penny. And I'm not sure how their system allowed them to give us. It was in one case 7 cents, but then they redid it and it was $6.16. But I don't know how their system allowed them to make an error like that. I would think it should tie. Mm-hmm. But they're still getting used to these things. They didn't understand what we were talking about, and we eventually ended up closing and putting in 7 cents and $6.16 to get the thing closed on time, because we can't be short.
That's right.
So
we're going to come back in the third set, speaking with real estate attorney Bob Thompson, and can't wait to hear a little bit more about the relationship between the attorney and the lender, and Bob's perspective over these last 3 decades, and how things have changed, some for the better and some have just changed. We'll be right back. This is All Things Moore County.
There's always something happening, and it's usually
Welcome back to our final set of All Things Moore County with real estate attorney Bob Thompson. We are consistently going over on each set, which doesn't surprise me, but we have a lot of ground to cover. I've not had a chance to talk to you. How long have you lived in Moore County?
I've lived here for 33 years.
How did you get here? Because you went to Wake Forest Law School?
Well, I went to Wake Forest Law School, but before that I went to Chapel Hill and got an MBA, and then I went up to sunny Rochester, New York, and spent about 8 or 9 years up there, and decided that I really liked North Carolina.
You were practicing law in Rochester?
No, I was in corporate finance.
Were you really?
I was.
I didn't know that.
And I had not decided to go back and go to law school at that point. Then after I'd worked for a while, I decided that's what I wanted to do, so I came back to Wake Forest.
How'd you get to Moore County?
Well, Moore County is a kind of a unique and wonderful place for estate planning and estate administration.
Right.
And it's one of the few cities in North Carolina where there's a lot of that, and I had wanted to do state tax and state administration work, so this seemed like a very good place to settle. And then once I was down here, a big part of the practice sort of was developed in real property, which fits in very nicely with the estate administration.
Mm-hmm.
I meet the clients sometimes with the real estate, and then we go further and do estate planning work with them.
Right. And that estate planning work, you've seen a change in the demographics in Moore County. One generation is transitionalizing at the top end, and yet there are generations replacing them.
Well, it's changed considerably since I've been here. I managed to get here right in the middle of a recession, and it has come up very nicely since then. And so we have seen as the community has changed. Pinehurst was almost an entirely resort and retirement community at that time, and now it's much more varied. Southern Pines also is much more varied and has a much wider spectrum of people than were there when I came here.
Mm-hmm. You got your wing, so to speak, from Harry Fullenwider. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Harry Fullenwider and Hoke Pollock.
Tell me about them, because I don't know who they are, but I'm sure a lot of people here do.
Well, Harry and Hoke were kind of the gurus of real property. They started practice here in 1948. And they practiced pretty much up until Harry died in 1997. And they trained many of the fine attorneys in Moore County. They were tremendous. I don't think I found more than 2 or 3 mistakes in Harry's work in all the years I've looked at it. So I do have a lot of Harry's work. I bought that practice, so we have all the files that they had.
Oh, wow.
But it is, they were tremendous practitioners.
In speaking to your assistant, Sherry, she told me that you have papers and files that go back, many, 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 many years. You don't let go of anything.
Well, and we use it.
And you use it.
Because one thing about title work, it keeps coming up, and if you have old resources, it helps considerably. It gives you a starting point to move forward from. It helps quite a bit, and I think I've got files back into the 20s. From Harry Fullenwider's father-in-law. Mm-hmm. So we have pretty good set of resources, and but it's very helpful. I try and keep my pieces of paper. People ask for them all the time.
Do they really?
Ask for copies of things. So we have a need for them.
Tell me a little bit about. There are many different types of ownership that people, and that's where your estate planning and your real estate practice actually can go hand in hand, because at different stages of someone's life, real estate can be held in many different forms.
Well, we have people who own property individually. We have a joint tenancy between husband and wife called tenancy by the entireties, which is the most common form.
Right.
And it's a very protective form of ownership because it's not subject to the creditors of either spouse alone, can't be severed. We have joint tenancy with right of survivorship now between unmarried folks. That's very helpful to us. We have people who own property in trusts. We get property through estates, and people are using LLCs and we would not really want them to use corporations, but LLCs a lot of time to own property. So we help people depending on what their needs are and what they're trying to do.
I'm going to guess about 20 or 30 years ago, you never saw as many second and third marriages where people were buying property. There weren't as many divorces. There weren't as many people, remarrying, stepchildren. Just the dynamics have all changed.
It has certainly changed,
right.
and we have a lot of what we affectionately call blended families here.
Right.
And they present an estate planning challenge to us.
I bet.
But we try and make sure that we keep the family intact and treat everybody fairly. And a lot of times the issues connected with blended family are not apparent to the parents in the blended family.
Yeah.
So we feel that we do a service to them of trying to bring these issues up and deal with them.
33 years has given you enough time probably to have had experience working with two different generations of the same family going forward.
I actually have some that are three different generations of the same family.
Right.
It's yes, and I kind of like to think that we have a family practice.
Yeah.
We like to represent the family as opposed to just representing one individual.
Right.
And we feel we can deal with them better when we have a better idea of what they are and what the family's desires are and where we need to go with them.
Yeah. Digressing back to real estate a little bit, our business was a little easier and a little bit more enjoyable back in 2004, 2003, 2005. There wasn't as much drama. There weren't as many minefields. There weren't as many tap dances to do. Today we all become a little bit more of alarmists where we're trying to lay out the groundwork for what is in front of our client. It's not as much fun. It's a little more challenging. It can be actually more rewarding, but I mean, just from being in the industry, it's a little more difficult.
Well, in 1983,
Yep.
we really used to enjoy closings. Everybody got together. It was kind of a party atmosphere. Nobody was jumping up and down on the table or demanding money from the other side.
Right.
And we only had 4 documents in a closing. We had a settlement statement and a deed of trust and a deed and an owner's affidavit, and we weren't dealing with title insurance, so our files were rather thin. And we had less that we had to deal with at closing. And so we used to have some very amicable closings between buyers and sellers. I don't find that today, and I think that's a big change in the way we view things.
So part of that, I think, is I see a sense of entitlement that didn't exist 15 years ago, where there's a fraction. There are a lot of different factions of people, and everyone is sort of out for themselves. There's a sense of what's in it for me, unfortunately, and a sense of entitlement that I don't remember growing up. I don't know if you remember growing up that way.
No, I think you're right, Bill, and I think things are harder, and by the time you get through with the process, a lot of people are just worn out and they're a little cranky. So I think they have tendency to comes out in funny ways.
So the backdrop is that our market in the early 2000s, every year, didn't matter what you did, property values went up 2, 3, 4%. So that backdrop created, didn't matter. You closed, take on the responsibility and your asset would increase. Today, not quite the same. We have people that are hoping to sell their property and just get out of it and not have to write a check or just to break even. Every nickel counts. Everybody is watching and people want to buy properties at the very best prices because they're not assured of the same things that happened in the earlier part of the 2000s.
Yeah, I think it definitely puts more stress on them when you can't be certain of what the future is going to hold on a property.
Right. I've been impressed with the demeanor in your closing room, at your closing table. Even though everyone is walking into the room and everyone is coming from a different emotional point of view, sometimes you will come in and very calm. You will hide some of the issues that have come up with the lender, the last-minute things, or with your legal assistant. You have to present almost like a very fair, calm, balanced perspective, and just keep focused on getting to the finish line.
Well, I suppose if I can't keep calm,
right,
then we're sort of lost.
Right.
In that closing. So,
that's right.
But we do try and keep the emotion down.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't do anybody any good to get too excited about it.
Yeah.
Most things are going to work themselves out. We just need a little time to fix it.
Right. You've been practicing in Southern Pines all this time. Have you ever been outside of Southern Pines?
Well, I actually practiced in Pinehurst for 3 years.
Okay.
And then I decided I really would rather practice. I went over with Hoke and Harry, and they were just an absolute perfect place for me to be.
Right.
So I learned a lot. You need a mentor, and Harry Fullenwider was the world's best mentor.
How many years were you with him?
About 10 or 12, until he died in 1997.
Uh-huh. So I would guess your generation of attorneys are all familiar with him.
My generation, yes.
Right.
The newer attorneys,
right.
Probably not. But Harry was a very interesting fellow. He used to pick up the phone and say, "This is Fullenwider," and everyone was supposed to know that was Harry.
As he coughed through the phone.
And as he sort of
gruffled through the phone.
Yeah, and it was very distressing to him. In the last year of his practice, that the place had grown and people didn't know what that gruff voice meant.
Right.
But he was actually a cream puff. He was an extremely nice fellow.
I started the show by describing you as careful, and I think you've made me look good because of the way you deal with the information and the way you present it. What people don't know is that you can have all this information, but what you say to them when you're sitting with them, it's a much more in layman's terms, much easier to digest. People want things to be smooth and easy, and I think that just listening to you speak today will help a lot of buyers in particular, and first-time buyers in particular, understand a little bit more about the process. And so when a broker recommends an attorney or two or three, they will have a better understanding of the next phase of their real estate transaction. Where can you have a website?
I have a website, Robert S. Thompson, PA.
Uh-huh.
And it's easy to get to. If you put in Southern Pines next to that, I think I come up first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, or something like that.
Did you strike a deal with the devil or with Google, or?
I have not participated heavily in the website. Most of my referrals come from clients, so.
Right.
But I think it's nice to have people get a little idea,
right,
and see a picture of me. So I think I'm not heavily invested in it, but it is nice to have.
Well, a good real estate broker can start the process with the client. They can identify the property. They can present a contract to the next phase, which is to the attorney and the lender. And in essence, we all kind of work as a team in concert together to get the parties to closing. We've avoided a little bit about the lender snafus and the different change in regulations, but it's very, very important that our clients listen to a good real estate broker. We prep them with the expectations, and then we pass them on to you, sort of like a baton. And then we try to be mother-in-laws and kind of hang in there with you to make sure that we're all together at the closing line together.
That is certainly the objective, and we like to make sure it all hangs together and keep people informed. I think it helps us when everybody knows what's going on.
We tell sellers all the time the best money they can spend before they list their home for sale is a pre-listing appraisal. We tell buyers the best money they can spend is get a good attorney. Make sure that the largest asset that you're probably going to be purchasing in your life doesn't have the defects that you were speaking about, and that you can deliver the good title that they're going to need so that they have no issues when they look over their shoulder down the road.
Well, I think that's nice advice.
Yeah. We look forward to seeing you again. We appreciate you coming in to talk with us, and here's to the next 33 years.
Well, thank you, Bill.
You do
it's
it.
very nice to be here.
We've been speaking with real estate attorney and estate planning lawyer Bob Thompson out of Southern Pines. It's a fascinating topic. It might not be the most exciting topic to listen to, but it's the most important information that you can know if you're in the market to purchase or sell a home. We will talk with you next week. This is All Things Moore County.
In the middle of